Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to discuss some books that I think are really popular and loved here on Booktube, but it feels like the rest of the world hasn't really caught on to these yet and should. The idea behind this video actually came from the opposite. I have a video I've done where I talk about books that I think should have a little bit more hype here on Booktube, and some of those books are just underhyped in general. Everywhere it feels like nobody's really giving these books the attention they deserve. But specifically, some of those books are actually popular outside of Booktube. It just feels like Booktube itself doesn't really notice them as much as I would expect or think that those books deserve. So then I thought it'd be fun to do the opposite and, as I've already discussed, talk about Booktube darlings that the rest of the world needs to find out about. So to give some perspective, I wanted to start by mentioning how many ratings, just ratings, there are on Goodreads of some books that have caught the attention of a lot of other people. And I'm going to start with one that is fantasy because all the ones on my list today, with the exception of one, are fantasy, and so I wanted to provide that perspective for books within the same genre. Fantasy, with the exception of something like Game of Thrones, tends to still be a little bit more of a niche than contemporary fiction and such things. However, there are the occasional fantasy books that cross over into something where it becomes more mass appeal or at least attracts the attention of other people. And I wanted to use the example of Name of the Wind. Name of the Wind has 885,000 ratings on Goodreads. And then I wanted to then provide an example of what I was just saying, where contemporary fiction and those sorts of things tend to be easier to get into, and so you're going to see a lot more ratings for those. I'm going to mention the author Colleen Hoover because she's enormous right now. Everybody seems to be talking about her. If you walk into a lot of bookstores, they have entire tables dedicated to her. If you walk into Target, there's a whole shelf of books that are all by Colleen Hoover. And so I'm going to go to It Ends With Us, because that is arguably her most popular one. And it has 2.3 million ratings on Goodreads. So I wanted to provide those examples to start, to give you some perspective about the books that maybe you feel like you hear about over and over and over and over again on Booktube. And in your mind, you're like, I get it. These are popular. Everybody talks about these, but not really everybody. Just this little tiny corner of Booktube. And it also kind of puts into perspective how tiny Booktube actually is. So I'm going to start with one that I definitely think that when this one was being discussed, it was everywhere. Everywhere. So much to a point where even people that were interested in the series decided maybe I will not check it out yet and kind of wait until the hype's died down so I don't overhype it for myself. For some people, they started the series but felt like they couldn't continue because of that same concept where everybody was talking about the conclusion, and they're like, ugh, I kind of want to wait until all of that has gone so that I'm not going in with unrealistic expectations, and that would be Jade City. So this is part of the Greenbone saga, and just out of curiosity, if you want to sort of make a game out of this video, you can write how many ratings you think the books have on Goodreads, and that way you can then pause it and then come back and see how off your assumptions were. Jade City feels like one that I saw everywhere, especially in fantasy circles, and here's the answer now, so if you do want to pause, you can pause and put your guess in first. It has under 42,000, and that is the highest one on today's list. I'm starting with the highest. So this is truly one that I think exists here on Booktube in a bubble of, isn't this amazing? It is amazing. It is amazing. And everybody's kind of just going back and forth telling each other how amazing it is. And then nobody outside of it seems to notice. And there was a while where it was said there was going to be an adaptation. The adaptation was in the works. And then I think it got canceled. This is the only book on today's list that I'm not actually an enormous fan of. I like everything about it in theory, but just the way it was executed and primarily the characters, I just didn't really, I don't know what it was, I didn't connect with them, and they're not always really very amazing people, so I don't really know that connecting with them is the right way to put it, but it was like I didn't enjoy following them because so many of them just irritated me. However, the book does a fantastic job of having flawed perspectives. It's an urban fantasy setting, but still within a fantasy world, and it's more modern, which is very different from a lot of other fantasy. I think this also makes it much more accessible to a lot of people who don't typically pick up fantasy because it's not as daunting. You don't have to take in so much. You don't have to figure out this brand new world. Magic system is tied to Jade. Some people have certain powers associated with Jade, but it almost comes across more of like a drug. And the families that you're following in the story are essentially crime families. And so I think, again, there's so much there that a lot of people who don't read fantasy a lot, they're not going to feel like, oh my gosh, what have I even gotten myself into? It's going to feel like they're reading almost like The Godfather, but with some cool powers mixed in, and the fact that it is a slightly different world from our own. There's also tons of familial drama that I think people eat up, and there's high stakes, there's twists and turns, there are some cool action scenes. I was so excited when they announced the adaptation because even though I didn't love following those characters within the book, I can only imagine how much fantastic actors could bring those characters to life in that different medium, and then also how the action scenes would play out, the drama within various different scenes, the tension that would build up between characters as they're talking. I just thought an adaptation would be perfect, a perfect way to get more people to discover this series and this story. And the fact that I'm pretty sure it got canceled is just so disappointing. That would have been phenomenal, I'm sure. But regardless, let me know if you agree. Do you feel like Jade City is one that you're shocked to know that it doesn't have more ratings than that? Do you think it should have more ratings? And do you also feel like this is a good example of a book that, even though it's fantasy, can be appealing on a mass appeal sort of level? The next book I think epitomizes this entire concept, and that would be The Sword of Kaigen. This book gets talked about so much on Booktube. There's so many people that list this as some of their favorite science fiction fantasy. People talk about how it's one of their favorite self-published books. There are people that talk about how it's one of the most emotional things they've ever read. There's tons of reviews. There's tons of discussions. People love this book. It is absolutely a Booktube darling, and yet it has around 13,000 ratings. I was shocked when I found that out because I know that Booktube is small, but when something blows up on Booktube, I have a hard time conceptualizing what that means in a quantifiable way, because views can be so much higher than ratings. And obviously not everybody who views a review or who is watching a person's top fantasy books, just because a video might do really well and it might get 20, 30,000, 100,000 views, doesn't mean that many people are going out and picking those books up. So it's just hard to conceptualize what you would actually get with the ratings. So the fact that it has 13,000, I still was like, I thought there would be more than that, but no, it's that low. And I guess in some ways I almost feel like this could be on that video about books that deserve more hype on Booktube, except for Booktube I feel like is talking about it a ton. It's not getting as much attention from, I think, outside of Booktube readers. This book, I have talked about it many times, so I probably don't need to mention the synopsis, but if you don't know, it follows a society that propaganda has been used to convince them that they are essentially cannon fodder, that they are there to be the people that take the brunt of any kind of invasion to protect the rest of their country, and it has turned them into a warrior class of people that would do anything. They would die for their country. And our main character is a teenage boy who's starting to question some of the things that he's been told. He's starting to hear about things that go on in other countries, and he's realizing how different his own country is, and maybe not for the better. And his mother is witnessing her son discover these things, and she is proud of him, but she fears for his life at the same time. And then, of course, given the reasons for propaganda, there are some action sequences that involve if there is some form of an invasion, and what that means, how the government is connected to it, all those sorts of things that I think is very appealing to a lot of people, plus a cool magic system and great dynamics between family members. So it's a great story, and I feel like more people need to discover it outside of Booktube. After that, we have The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. This one has far more than Sword of Kaigen. I actually thought it and Sword of Kaigen would be a lot closer together, but I was quite wrong. This one has almost 3 times the amount of ratings, a little under. It has 35,000. I think that this one I have seen marketed a lot more in bookstores. I see it facing out. I see it on tables. And I think it gets mentioned in a lot of lists for fantasy that is for people who maybe don't typically read fantasy. It's been compared to Studio Ghibli. So I think there's a lot to it, that it has stuff going for it. And this one might continue to build up. But I was surprised because I have seen it out and about so much more. I have seen it in marketing campaigns and things like that I thought it would have more than 35,000. But again, just comparing numbers, didn't you think that this one wouldn't be so close in numbers to Jade City? This one is 35 and Jade City has a little under 42,000. That's surprisingly close, especially because this one is a much newer release than Jade City. Regardless, this one follows a girl who there is this sea god that its wrath has caused natural disasters to affect people who are living on land, and they hope that if they have a woman dedicate herself to the sea god and jump into the sea and become his bride, that eventually his wrath will be gone and then everybody can live in peace. However, none of the women that have sacrificed themselves have yet to appease the sea god, and our main character, she is not the person who's meant to be his bride, but the person who is meant to be is someone that she just absolutely cannot stand for sacrificing themselves, because it is the person that her brother is deeply in love with. And so she dedicates herself in their stead, and then once she is in the realm of the gods, that's when everything kind of takes a turn for the more fantastical, and that's primarily where you start to see the comparisons to Studio Ghibli. It is very enchanting, the writing is very pretty, it's very whimsical and fairy tale-like. So once again, I think this is one that a lot of people would really, really love who don't maybe typically consume a lot of Booktube. The next one I'm going to mention is the only one on the list that is not fantasy. It has an adaptation, so the thing I'm going to mention is a manga, and therefore its adaptation is an anime. And manga is kind of, it's not the best indication of how popular it actually is to look at ratings on Goodreads, because often those ratings, people don't necessarily rate manga at the same level that they rate books. However, if you compare this manga to a lot of other really, really popular manga, it is still shockingly low. And it's one I've been talking about for years, and I'm glad it's starting to get more popular. I'm glad to see other people starting to look into it and start reading it and discussing it, because it absolutely deserves it. And that would be Vinland Saga. This is, at its core, a story about revenge, but it does that story so well. It doesn't fall into the same traps that a lot of revenge stories tend to fall into, and even the ones that maybe are common, certain themes like, is it actually going to destroy you? This pursuit of revenge, that's something you see almost all the time. The way that that particular thing is done in Vinland Saga is next to none. It is absolutely exceptional. This is a Viking-inspired story, and a lot of the figures are either people that were real or almost like myths in a sense. And so you're seeing a lot of actual history poured into this story, and you're following this character Thorfinn as he is seeking revenge on behalf of somebody that he loved. To the point of this, go ahead and take your guess if you want to go ahead and guess, but the ratings for this one are around 5,000. 5,000 for this first volume. I think that is criminal. I think that is ridiculous. This is why I'm saying for so long I need more people to check out Vinland Saga, and again, I'm glad that more people are finally checking out Vinland Saga, but it still deserves more attention. The last one for today. The reason I expected this to have a lot more hype around it is because it was a Book of the Month pick. And a lot of times when fantasy has a Book of the Month option for it, it almost immediately gets a stamp of success. It's almost like, okay, well, now it is so easy to access for people outside of Booktube. It's literally within a book subscription box that is really affordable. This isn't sponsored by Book of the Month. I do work with them, but that's not my point. My point is, it is a very affordable book service, and it is a way a lot of people end up discovering fantasy reads. So I would have thought that this one kind of would have broken out of the Booktube fantasy bubble, and alas, it has not, and that would be the Stardust Thief. This is such a fun, adventurous story, and the idea is it takes the 1001 Nights stories and it puts those within more of an adventure tale. It kind of ties them all together, and you're seeing this trek across the desert with various different character types. You see a character that is somebody who has a bond with a djinn, who is selling things at this midnight market that are somewhat illegal to be selling, and then you have a prince that just craves adventure. You have this warrior assassin-like character, and you're seeing all these people come together on a quest. And you're also seeing the way that some of their connections and relationships with people aren't maybe what they thought they were. You're seeing them confront their pasts, and there's just so much to it that I think a lot of people would really like. I think traveling and adventure stories for a while were kind of out, but this story is kind of making me a believer. It makes me want more of that fun, fast-paced action, adventure, banter type of story. And I think that's what a lot of people really enjoy too, especially because this is taking a story that we've only really seen here and there, but we're familiar with it, and then it's in the hands of somebody that's doing a great job with it. And so I just think the Stardust Thief deserves more hype. But looking at, again, the amount of ratings, again, I just really want to emphasize it was a Book of the Month pick. 13.7 thousand. That's really low. That's really low. And I thought this would have maybe been a little bit higher or closer to at least The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. I thought these would be closer together, but evidently not. So in general, all of these I think deserve a little bit more hype outside of Booktube. And there are plenty of books, of course, that I think deserve more hype in general, but these are ones that specifically are hyped here on Booktube that don't seem to be getting as much hype elsewhere, and so therefore have these shockingly kind of low amounts of ratings. I'm curious of the ones I mentioned, which one was the most surprising to hear the amount of ratings, and then also which one do you think deserves to be hyped the most. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Definitely let me know other books that you think fall within this category. But anyway, thanks so much, and I'll see you later. Bye.